Southeast Texas Weekly, brought to you by the Modern Vein Surgery Institute at Privity Clinic for Surgical Care.
Welcome to this week's edition of Southeast Texas Weekly. Today's discussion centers around sex trafficking or human trafficking right here in Southeast Texas. We are going to learn what signs we need to look out for, we'll hear stories that may sound familiar to you, and just about anything we can think of on that topic to educate you as much as possible. Now, joining me now is Lisa, who works with victims of sex trafficking and human trafficking with a nonprofit called Harvest House. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you for having me.
So, Lisa, let's talk first. When we say human trafficking, what exactly are we talking about?
Human trafficking is the force, fraud, and coercion of a person that cannot take up for themselves.
Okay. So whether it be they're sold for sex or made to work without pay.
It is modern day slavery. Yes,
modern day slavery. Okay. So after talking with Lisa, I did an investigation into sex trafficking right here in Southeast Texas. I narrowed it down to sex trafficking because human trafficking is so huge for a TV show. We could only concentrate on one part of that. The investigation, we called it Stolen Lives. Let's take a look at that, and then Lisa and I will talk on the other side. The girl you see walking down the street may not be what you think. Human sex trafficking is more prevalent than ever before. Amy was sold for sex for almost 7 years before she took back her stolen life.
I was his, nobody else's.
Amy's boyfriend, Pimp, had complete control of her, making it difficult to get away.
He came up and in the middle of the street kicked me in the face and broke my nose and kicked me in my ribs several times and just left me there with blood everywhere.
Do you think those people knew that this wasn't your choice?
Yeah, a lot of them.
Lisa works with sex trafficking victims through a nonprofit called Harvest House. We are not using Lisa's last name for her protection.
25% of all human trafficking is in the state of Texas.
According to the Department of Justice, Interstate 10 is the main corridor for sex trafficking.
Houston is known as the conditioning city. There are pimps all over that send their prostitutes to Houston to be conditioned. They starve them, they drug them, and they beat them until their will is broken.
During our 12 News investigation, our cameras captured this footage at a restaurant near the Interstate 10 Highway 69 interchange. We asked Beaumont Police Officer Joe Ornelas about the footage. He says what our cameras caught is very suspicious, and the Beaumont PD is now investigating. There are stories upon stories of human trafficking coming right out of Southeast Texas.
There was a gentleman in Port Arthur. He was HIV positive, so the first thing he would do was sleep with them, and that was a part of the conditioning. Then he would make his appointments at a local hotel.
The majority of activity is generated online. Backpage.com is the #1 site pimps use to sell their victims.
They put pictures of them there, and of course they all say that they're 18 years old, but they sell girls much younger than 18 years old.
The average age of a trafficked victim is between the ages of 8 and 14 years old. It's estimated that 1 in 3 children who run away from home are lured into sex trafficking within the first 48 hours. Officer Ornelas trains other officers.
In the latest stats I saw, there's 27 million people enslaved today in the world. And out of that, these traffickers make $32 billion a year. That's billion dollars a year.
Wow. With so much at stake, the only way many victims get their stolen lives back is to be arrested. And if you don't get out,
then 7 to 10 years, you will be dead.
I've seen people killed out there, girls, because they didn't do what they're supposed to do.
Amy tried going to jail 9 times before she finally got away from her pimp. And then one day, beaten and bruised, she sat down on the curb.
I was asking God to help me, get me off the street.
And of course, Amy's savior at that point came in the form of a police officer, and she was arrested, which happens to many of these girls. But I want to back up. We'll talk about that in just a little bit later. But I want to talk about, in the piece I referred to her pimp as her boyfriend pimp. And I think we need to clarify that. When we say that, what are we talking about?
Well, in Southeast Texas, I often talk to young girls who are dating. They meet someone, and he wines and dines them for 2 or 3 months, and then eventually he asks something of them, and that is that he, needs maybe his truck note paid or his rent paid, and then he sells her and keeps the money. And once they've done it once, then they begin to do it more and more, and they call them a boyfriend pimp. And the girl is so coerced and afraid of losing him that she concedes to do what he asks her to do.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened to Amy. She's told me within 2 weeks he had her doing stuff for him.
Yes.
And she was extremely frightened for her life to even leave. Now, the other type of pimp that we referred to in the piece was a guerrilla pimp. Tell us about that one.
I'll tell you a story about a young girl. She ran away from home in San Antonio, and she was walking down the street. It was getting late, and a gentleman came out of a hotel room and began talking to her, offered her a place to stay, and she said yes. Within 24 hours, he had pictures of her on Backpage, and he was selling her.
Oh,
he took her cell phone. He would not let her contact her relatives. He told her when to eat. He told her when to go to the restroom. And he sold her over 200 times from San Antonio down I-10 to Beaumont, Texas. When she got to Beaumont, they had picked up another girl, and they were conditioning her. And this guerrilla pimp, he does everything by force. And he was having her and another girl in the hotel room condition the new girl. The new girl was being beaten by the telephone, by the luggage rack, and someone in the next room heard the commotion and called 911. And that is how she was saved.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, we have to take a break on that note. So much more to discuss on this. We'll be right back after this break.